Welcome to the Promise Podcast, where we discuss how brands can deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. I'm your host, Harald Lamberts, and in each episode, I talk to business executives, thought leaders, and founders about how to achieve effective collaboration across departments, such as brand, marketing, product development, customer experience, and support, all with one goal in mind: a seamless customer journey with great business results. Today, we're thrilled to have Zack Hamilton with us, an expert in CX with a unique, no bullshit perspective on creating business impact. Welcome, Zack.
Harold, glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. It's been pretty fruitful on LinkedIn. Always looking forward to your post and sharing some debate, even in the comments. So looking forward to this conversation.
Very much. Likewise. It's funny how we resonate online and then meet in person, actually. So great.
Yeah.
To start things off, before we do your proper introduction, what's your favorite brand in terms of, your own customer experience and why?
Yeah, it's this one's. I've been thinking about this question and I've been thinking about what are the brands that I've really just kind of been compelled with here recently. And I think there's a couple brands that come to mind, but I think there's two that really kind of stick out. They're kind of my favorite retail brands right now that, one, I just live and die in retail, right? That's where I spend all of my time. I think the two brands, one is North Face. I'm everything outdoors, and especially just coming off the summer and fall where it's been all about hiking and trail running and all the outdoors. So you're going to often catch me in a North Face, probably shirt and some runners. And I think the other brand for me right now that I love, I'm actually wearing it, it's Faherty. So Faherty is a direct-to-consumer brand. Think about kind of West Coast meets kind of the professional side of it. So Alex and his brother started the brand. And I'll tell you why I love the brand so much right now is they are absolutely growing. So online, shattering records. They've been opening up retail brick and mortar stores now, but they've been very, very thoughtful in where do we open up. They don't want to open up in traditional malls because that's not where their consumer base is. They're really looking for those eclectic areas where the brick and mortar store just becomes an extension of their brand, where you can go and experience the brand. Alex is also the CEO, is very reachable on LinkedIn. So there's been a few times where him and I have connected. I've also seen, someone talk about their loyalty club and how they're not a fan of it. And he's just replied right back into the comments about, hey, sorry that you don't like our loyalty program. Would love to pick your brain about what it is that you want. So that we can meet your needs. And so I think that's the reason why, where as a CEO, when you have hundreds of decisions that you got to make every single day to grow your brand, especially when they are a growth brand right now, to still just stay very much in touch with your consumers is absolutely phenomenal. And that's what I love about the brand right now.
Yeah, and what it sounds like, we'll dive into it later in the podcast more, but what it sounds also like is a very much intentional, like very strategic about and instead of just going out and build stores, like be very conscious about how you want that experience between online and offline to gel together.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the fit is great. I mean, I love that. This is my go-to kind of business casual kind of sweatshirt. I travel on it when I travel overseas to Europe most days, most often. But what I also love about the brand is it's just as easy to return merchandise if the fit doesn't work out as it is to purchase. And I think that's one of the most common barriers in retail today is the returns process suck.
Yeah. No, I will get onto your topic of post-purchase experience later in the podcast for sure. So with that, let me properly introduce you before we get so excited about the content. Zack Hamilton is a LinkedIn top voice on customer experience. With a somewhat rebellious tone, he's challenging the status quo in the field of CX management to inspire people to deliver real business value. That's why he's the ideal first guest of our CX Business Impact podcast, as this is exactly the goal of this podcast series. Welcome, Zack. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Wow, I appreciate that. Challenging the status quo. When you said that, I had to reflect on it, but I think it's always been part of my nature to challenge things. I'm sure my mom would probably tell you that As much as I'm her favorite kid, I'm sure my sisters will love to hear that when they listen to this. But I've always been one to say we could do this better. Doesn't matter how good the process is or how good the experience is. I always think there's a better way to do it. So always challenging it.
100%. Wonderful. All right. So that was my introduction of you. But of course, there's a lot more to it. So, what I would like to, can you maybe introduce yourself a little bit? I've looked at your LinkedIn profile and you originally started as a sales professional, I noticed, and which actually is not bad considering the topic today. And then grew into roles through Medallia, Chatter, ParcelLab, and Forsta. So, can you say a little bit about that whole journey of your career into the field of customer centric and customer experience, and how it shaped you and your vision on customer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I think ultimately I never set out to be, a customer experience leader. I've never set out to lead customer experience strategy or customer centric initiatives. And quite frankly, I never even set out to be a LinkedIn top voice in customer experience. Like that's never been my goal. To me, I grew up on a dairy farm here in rural America. And so, I just fell in love with hard work. Being on a dairy farm is not easy, but I also knew I didn't want to run the dairy farm when I got out of high school. And so ultimately, my parents, they really encouraged us to work throughout high school just to get some experience. And so, I had a couple first jobs. One of my first jobs was in a restaurant. I just loved interacting with people. The competition, Harold, was always like, how do I increase my tips? And so what I started to learn was, hey, if I'm attentive to their needs and I deliver great service, I'm going to get a bigger tip. And ultimately, that just kind of translated over. I hated school. I went to college only because I played college tennis. I didn't go to college because I wanted to study. And I found myself just being an operator at heart. So I've always been in retail. So my journey really started in operations. If you look at the bulk of my career, most of my career has been in store, where I was a store manager, worked my way up to a multi-unit leader where I had 12 different stores, then a VP of operations where it just kind of grew, right, to 100 stores. And then ultimately, while I was at Aaron's, Harold, we were kind of struggling. We were a 55-year-old business and traditional rent to own here in the States. And if you think about kind of that customer base, incredible customer base, they just had some unfortunate like life events happen to them. So think about a health issue, a divorce, maybe they lost their job. And so they couldn't go out and just pay cash for an everyday TV or merchandise. And so ultimately they had to do rent to own transaction. And part of how I came into CX was we were struggling with this huge disconnect from the store support center, which is what Aaron's called the corporate office, to the field, right? So you think about 1,200 corporate stores, an additional 500 or so franchise stores. So you had a store base of 1,700 stores where you're constantly trying to iterate and innovate on the business and look at the business model, and you're serving new customers every single day. There's a lot of change that has to happen. And so ultimately, we took the worst performing division, we made it the top performing division. And what I didn't realize I was focusing on was the customer experience, because that just wasn't a term that I knew. But we were always looking at, why customers were churning. How can we improve their experience when they walked into our stores? What's the level of service we've got to dedicate to them? So we were doing customer experience without knowing that we were doing customer experience. And so our CEO asked me to take a role in Atlanta in the store support center. And ultimately, my task, really, if I think about it, Harold, was I was leading change. I was the change leader. So, how do I partner with the store support center to help them roll out their specific initiatives, but then also be the liaison back to the store support center on this is why it wasn't working? We had a lot of mistrust between the field and the store support center. And so that's how I got started. If you really think about customer experience, and I'll tell you this one initiative, it's a story. It's a long kind of drawn out how I got to customer experience. But one of the initiatives that I led was launching our smartphone division. And Aaron's had already tried their hand at smartphones a couple times prior, but we knew this was a specific need in the market, especially as these, the tier one devices like the Apple iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy phones were really becoming hot commodities. And so I started leading a 100-store pilot with the smartphones. We had record number of leases. We were growing store revenue. We were reactivating lapsed customers. We became the number one cellular activation with our partner Cricket Wireless. And so we were heading into this executive update. So it was the CEO, the COO, CFO. I kind of reported up through the COO at the time, through my boss. And we were having this conversation about giving the readout about the financial performance and everything. And the CFO, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, Steve, was just like, look, Zach, it's incredible, right? Like the customers are coming in, they're actually getting multiple leases. It's not just smartphones, but we're seeing our smartphone leases come back at record pace. So the life of the lease is about half of what a traditional life of lease is. And he's like, I need you to figure this out. And I'm like, look, I don't need any time. I know exactly why these smartphones are coming back. And he just kind of looked at me and I said, look, we have all this returns data from our customers. And what they're telling us is they want tier 1 devices. They don't want these tier 2 devices. And he's like, look, Zach, I get it, but tier 1 devices are too expensive. The profit margin on there wouldn't be there. So quite frankly, I just need you to figure out how to sell them on why the tier 2 device is much better. And Harold, it was at that moment, right? The renegade in me came out and I said, look, if my job is to figure out how to convince them to want a tier 2 device, we have greater issues than smartphones. We have a business problem. And fundamentally, if we don't change the way that we're thinking, we're not going to freaking be here in 2 years. And the meeting kind of shortly ended after that.
Yep.
My boss was hammering me after the meeting. I can't believe you do that. You should have given it 6 to 8 weeks, make them feel like, you actually went and did a study. And I'm like, look, I'm not in the business of wasting time. And the CEO came to my office a little bit later on, and he's like, look, Zach, I just had this conversation, completely understand what you need. We're going to procure some tier 1 devices. Let's see if your hypothesis is true from the customer feedback that you're getting.
Yeah.
He's like, look, I actually didn't come here to tell you that. We've never had someone in the business kind of stand up to us as executives like you just did. And quite frankly, I don't know what our experience strategy is. So I'm actually going to task you to be our head of customer experience.
Yeah. Well, go bold or go home, right?
That's right. And so I was just like, yeah, sure. I mean, I've always been the say yes, figure it all out later type mentality. So I was like, sure. And that's ultimately how I got into CX and leading customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, the red thread in this story, I guess, is that CX is not about just being friendly on the phone, but it's actually about having a quality of service that fits the needs of the customers and making sure that happens. And then, of course, provide a great experience around it as well. But, too often it's seen only as, the experience element of it and not the relevance of the service offering as well. So that's a reason in itself, to work closely with marketeers and proposition owners to make it, of course, an integrated story. How do you look at that?
Yeah, and what's interesting about this too is if we actually think about it, we were still an MPS. I call it the MPS shop at the time. And if you actually look at the MPS was actually at record highs for those 100 stores that we were testing in because we were offering a new line of merchandise, the smartphones that our customers couldn't get anywhere else. However, the returns of the smartphones were still at record high. And so ultimately, if I only just walked into that meeting saying, look, revenue's up, they're taking out multiple leases, we're reactivating lapsed customers, and our NPS is sky high, we would have actually ignored the overall problem, right? The fundamental problem was we were ignoring what our customers actually wanted. And so it was really thinking about early on, we saw the smartphones being returned a lot quicker. And so ultimately I asked the question, hey, why? And our store associates were like, look, we've always failed at smartphones. I don't understand why you guys thought that this time would work. And so it was, okay, how do we get to the true voice of customer? How do we really start to talk to the customer? So we did a mixture of things. Like we didn't just rely on the survey after they returned it, but we were calling the customers. So tell us about your experience with the smartphone device. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Why did you return it? And so we were just doing multiple ways of talking and understanding our customer. And ultimately, that's what CX is about, right? Is not just a score. I think that's why customer experience will be dead in 2 years. It's because we all still worship NPS versus really understanding the heart of the matter, which was we had high returns that was impacting our business. I had to understand why. And then I had to frame the problem to where it made sense to our executive leaders on if we just came out with this approach or this recommended merchandise, it would change. And it did. if we look at it, we ended up expanding to all 1,700 stores. Our franchisees adopted. Smartphones became a success. But in that pivotal moment, it could have easily been, hey, look, we have a return problem. It's not going to go away. Let's just cancel the initiative.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be that you're getting a high NPS. So you're basically saying customers are satisfied with the experience for a product they didn't want. And then
Yeah.
and then basically you're not making any business, but you're hiding the fact that there's a problem because your NPS is telling you you're doing a good job. So this could fundamentally, of course, be seen as doing a good job on CX without achieving any business impact. Yeah, so super important to connect the two, I think, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there's many other stories that I could go on and share about, how we were rolling out initiatives, how we involved the customer. I mean, my team, our motto became build for your customer, by your customer. So we lead with customer feedback, and then we think about, okay, how does this tie into the business goals? What are our top initiatives, and what feedback do we have that says, look, here's the experience that we need to design or redesign, or a process that has to get optimized if we want to achieve these specific initiatives.
Yeah, wonderful. Actually, we spoke with a big energy client, C-level person, and he also said we started on a CX transformation project, but halfway through the first few months, he said, actually, it's not customer experience; it's just being customer centric about in everything that you do, and then letting that inform your commercial excellence, but also your operational excellence. And I thought, hooray, hallelujah, he gets it. Yeah. So this is 100%, of course, what you need to do. And qualitative research that you said, and also trying to understand the why, etc. Trying to really understand what is the needs of the customer and how can you match that with the offering that you want to have in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like in the whole crux of just connecting the dots between how I became a CX leader at Aaron's, head of CX, to now being in tech. We were leveraging Medallia as our voice of customer platform. So Aaron's was one of the first 15 logos for Medallia. I remember I was still out in the field when Medallia was rolled out as an initiative, as a survey initiative within the organization. And so ultimately, when I first started leading CX, I had no clue what I was doing, like none. And so I always give it, credit to Medallia. One of the things that's very special about them is they know how to rally around their clients. And so ultimately, I got introduced to our account, my account executive, Bridget Megan, who's been so influential in my career. And she said, hey, don't worry about it. We got a team of top CX leaders that will help you. And they just rallied around me. And really helped educate me, folks like Dave Lambert, who's down under now. And I think about Farouk Javed, who they just really helped me understand kind of CX, what it was in retail, and how I should be thinking about becoming a future forward business in the way that we think about CX. I mean, funny story though, when I told them I was getting rid of NPS, they all kind of freaked out.
Yeah, because can you say a little bit about what your task was and your role when you came into Medallia? Like what was the task you were
Yes.
to do?
Yeah. So ultimately, one of my goals when I was still at Aaron's was, to build a CX strategy that Medallia admired so much that they wanted me to come work for them. So I'd done some kind of speaking events. I was on webinars with them, with Medallia. And so ultimately I got hired in, and my first role was really just around kind of thinking about partners in the tech stack. So when I was at Aaron's, we were one of the very first brands that integrated, our Medallia platform with Adobe, Salesforce, ServiceNow. So how do we bring our tech stacks together? How do we start to break down the silos, bringing all of our data together? And so ultimately, Medallia at that point was really building out their partner strategy. So I joined Lee Presley on the partner strategy side. And then at that point, Russ decided to take a step back from retail. Mike Galvin had retired from leading the retail vertical. And so that's where I got the nod of, hey, we want you to come in and lead retail experience strategy. And so that's how I kind of joined, kind of merged over into leading retail strategy. And I'll never forget, Harold, it was, started talking to some of the most fascinating chief experience officers, CEOs, practitioners alike, and some of the most innovative brands that they work with. One of the common things I started to hear was, look, traditional experience management was great. It served a purpose for 20 years. but the strategy's not working for us any longer. And so ultimately, part of what I had to do is think about, okay, how do I lean on my experiences of kind of rebelling against traditional experience management, the typical playbook. My survey looked just like everyone else's surveys, although my retail segment was different. And so it was like, how do we rebuild the entire retail experience strategy? And we did it. And then we had exponential growth in the retail vertical, which was really a testament to just driving an integrated vertical strategy and delivering value to our clients, who then said, okay, you're solving these problems for us. Can you come solve X, Y, and Z? And then we spent a lot of time really focused on how do we integrate EX plus CX and how that works. I was pretty rebellious when I said the biggest fundamental issue that we have with employee experience is that the HR leader is leading it, because they are not equipped to lead an experience strategy. It should fall to this experience strategist, the CX leader, or just experience leader. And HR is a stakeholder in an employee experience strategy.
Or
That
even
didn't go over well.
You mentioned also in an operational role. I think it can also work from an operational role. We see that also employee experience, of course, is actually about workflow.
Yeah.
So in operations, if you have a sensitive operational manager, he can also really think about operational excellence and making sure that people have what they need to do their job properly. But of course, they're a bit of a rare breed maybe, but I think that's something that could also work, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just kind of connecting the dots to my last 7 years in tech, I've always had this passion for retail. So I love retail, everything about it. I love customer and employee experience. And so, when you get to that moment, Harold, where it's like, okay, I've accomplished working at Medallia. We've achieved record growth in the retail vertical. Everything just kind of became on autopilot. And I tell every single boss of mine, don't ever let me fucking get bored. Because when I get bored, I will look for something to go disrupt. Like, that is my thing. I'm a builder at heart. I love to disrupt. I love to tear things apart and rebuild it. I guess that's why I'm always given like the most challenging initiative or business metric. And it's like, okay, take the worst and turn it into the best. And so that's what happened. I got bored at Medallia. Everything was on autopilot. And so I'm like, okay, I want to try my hand at a startup. And so I went to a startup, which was Chatter. We had an incredible product. But if we think about, again, how do you disrupt, the behemoths of the Medallias and the Qualtrics, even the InMoments and Forsters of the world, that takes a significant amount of investment. And the investment just ultimately, right, from a startup perspective, we just couldn't do it. Although we landed some pretty incredible brands, especially knocking out Medallias. Like, it was my first time going head to head in a sales cycle against Medallions, which was interesting. And then at that point, Forsta. So I hooked up with Giles Whiting when he was at Medallia. I joined Medallia. Him and I just kind of share the same working style. We have a passion for experience. We have a passion for building. We have a passion for disrupting the status quo. We're both crazy doing Ironman races at the same time.
Okay. Got it.
And so he's like, hey, why don't you come help us disrupt at Forsta? So went and joined Forsta. I love the whole human experience element, where it wasn't kind of customer experience, employee experience, product experience, your local experience. It wasn't just all of that. It was one human experience, which I absolutely loved. And the mission was, let's build, right? Let's just absolutely build, and had an incredible time. Forsta is an incredible organization. From the CEO of Kyle Ferguson and others, like just incredible people. And it's more predominant healthcare, right? If you think about Press Ganey's acquisition, as much as I want to see healthcare transformed, especially being a cancer patient myself and hating the US system, which I get it. We have one of the best healthcare systems in the world that people would argue. It's still a really shitty experience here, Americans would tell you.
It's the same here. I think the whole ecosystem is just a bit locked up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think you and I are all both passionate about really creating more holistic end-to-end experiences, and in this kind of siloed ecosystem, not within a company, but across companies, very challenging.
Yeah, 100%. And I look at the healthcare industry and I'm like, man, it would be fun to go disrupt it, right? But I have no credibility in healthcare other than being a patient, right? I've never led a healthcare brand. And so in order just to gain credibility, it would just take too long. And so at that point, Giles had joined ParcelLab as CEO. And he's like, look, it's exactly what you love. It is retail. It is the product market fit. It's an incredible piece of the journey. And I've always said, Harold, like the post-purchase experience is the number one ignored experience in the overall customer journey in retail. And so to me, like culture is incredibly important. So the crew here at Parcel Lab's amazing. So that's how I ended up at Parcel Lab. Is just not because I enjoy working with Giles, but taking a look at what they do. It's part of the customer journey that's overlooked. And can I go disrupt the thinking?
I mean, in general, I think we are a service design agency. We historically come from building great services, but the majority of the business and marketeers are really focused on activation and engagement pre-purchase. And then once the subscription or product or service is sold, it's not always as great as it is promised. So I think that post-purchase experience increasingly important, especially also in the marketing departments, to realize, if you can't only focus on the transactional efforts, but also on the loyalty and providing great service aspects once you are.
Yeah, and I think a lot of brands have focused so much on that pre-purchase and the purchase experience, right? Whether it's in store and you are rebuilding your entire sales effectiveness model, which I help so many retailers do while I was at Medallia, or you're a digital e-commerce leader and you're constantly trying to figure out, how do I move my cart conversion by 0.1%, right? I think everyone the last 10 years are squeaking out the margins where I've always said the miles are in your last mile experience.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I look at this as a blank canvas. I think, especially the height of COVID really opened our eyes to the post-purchase experience and what that's like. I say retailers check out at checkout, right? So once the checkout is complete,
Yeah.
the
That's a good one.
consumer experience almost just gets ignored, right?
And can you bring that back to, in the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned North Face being one of your favorite brands, along with the other brand you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is that also something you appreciate about them? Is that beyond the outdoors element that of course you like, but I mean, is that also, can you bring that back to North Face, or is that are there different reasons why you appreciate the brand?
Yeah, I mean, look, I appreciate North Face from just the overall perspective of I love the fit of their merchandise, right? I love just the inspiration they have of the outdoors. I think of a brand, I'll never forget when Giles was first when I reached out to him and said, hey, let's team up again. I'd never heard of Parcel Lab. And what's really interesting, right, is I had just placed this order with Yeti.
Mhm.
So we're a huge Yeti household. And Yeti, I just purchased something. I can't remember what it was that I purchased, but the entire post-purchase experience was pretty phenomenal, just from the way that they continue to tell their product story. So they absolutely own the overall brand experience, the way they tell their product story, the way that they connected with me, the way that they personalized it. So the products that they recommended me in that communication experience was actually products that I had looked at online that didn't make the purchase. And so when I was doing some research on Parcel Lab, like you do in your inbox, like if you type Forsta or you type Medallia, it'll pop up the different companies who want you to complete their survey. So I did the exact same thing. I just typed in Parcel Lab into my inbox and Yeti actually popped up. I had no clue that Parcel Lab powered the Yeti communication experience. But once I saw that, I was like, wow, it really just felt like the brand experience. And so to me, it was like, if we can just get brands to activate their own post-purchase experience, and that's what's driving loyalty, right? That's what closes the loyalty loop of your delivery experience, your returns experience, and just your brand experience.
Yeah, that's one thing we see actually, that engagement has a lot of focus pre-purchase, but what you're saying is actually brand engagement after purchase to turn you into a loyal customer. And I think any engagement strategy or personalization strategy should not only be built up to transaction, but actually also extend into being a loyal customer and keeping you on board as a customer going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, if
Wonderful.
there's one thing that, right, I was going to say, I think if there's one thing that the pandemic taught us is,
Mhm.
as humans, we are starved for connection. right? And so when you really think about, just going back to your point about engagement, so many brands are involved with transactional engagement instead of human engagement. And so the brands that are winning are really thinking about across the entire customer journey. And a lot of the work that you guys do is, where can we be transactional, but more importantly, where do we have to be human? And where do we have to engage from a human perspective? And I think the brands who are really driving that human experience, that human engagement, they're the brands that are winning right now.
Yeah, and if you make that strategic, so like if you know, hey, as a brand, we want to differentiate on A, B, or C, then you can also identify in the journey which are the moments of truth for our experience that we then have to personalize and excel in, instead of personalizing everything. I read that in one of your newsletters. It's just like personalizing everything and not choosing your strategic moments to shine and to differentiate, because that's what your brand stands for. And I think much more intentional than generalized everywhere. Yeah, so I think that is something that customers, I guess, if you really understand them, notice and will appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. And look,
Thanks.
I think the business values there too, right? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
stop looking at your NPS or CSAT in those specific moments and actually think about, when we deliver on those golden moments from a very high level of personalization, which matters, connect that back to time to repeat purchase, time, your average order value. And I would
100%.
say 99.9% of the time, it's a direct correlation between when we pick and choose the highest moments of value and we really focus on delivering great experiences, it translates into business value.
One thing we ask every guest in this podcast is there a big mistake you made that you never made again because you learned so much from it? You're like, okay,
Yeah,
I'll never do that again. What
I'll never
can
forget.
you give that cherry to the rest of the audience?
Yes, 100%. So I'll never forget. It kind of goes back to that initial story I told about, our CEO John Robinson at the time asking me to lead customer experience, and he said, "Look, I have a blind spot into it. I know we have an NPS score, but I don't know anything else about it." And so I'll never forget. I walked into my very first kind of executive readout, and I thought, man, I'm going to crush this thing, right? I had trend charts of NPS. I just took screenshots of text analytics and our top topics and themes. And I'll never forget, we were about 10, 15 minutes in, and I'm presenting this out. And he just looked at me and he's like, "So what?" And I'm like, "So what?" Like, I'm uncovering your blind spots that you told me you had, and I'm giving you the readout on it. And he's like, "Blind spots." So I had to re-educate him. Like, 6 weeks ago, you were just telling me about these blinds. He didn't remember, right? Like, CEOs don't remember. They're making hundreds of decisions every day. And he's like, "Zach, none of this means anything to me." And it was in that moment, Harold, like, I left the meeting, and of course I was just like, I'm not fit to be a CX leader. Why would they ever tap me to do this? And I called my mentor, David Beer, who's still at Aaron's in operations. And I said, "David, I don't think this is for me. I think it's time for me to come back into operations." And he's like, he always calls me Guido. "Guido, this is just an obstacle in the way. You got to figure out how to talk to them." And he doesn't talk NPS. He talks P&L. And that's where it was really around my role as a CX leader, is, yes, to talk to customers and yes, to talk, but I had to understand the language of our executive leadership team, and they talk P&L. And so I had to connect the dots between what our customers were telling us and the impact it had on the P&L. So that was my greatest lesson learned. And thankfully, I learned it very, very early on, where I never walked into another executive leadership meeting with NPS or CSAT or text analytics. I walked in and I presented out, here's the top 3 to 5 initiatives we have going on right now. Here are strategic things that we've delivered into the business, and here's the impact. And it's all because we learned X, Y, and Z from our customer. And so my framework was always, hey, what's the impact that we're trying to make in the business? And what are our customers telling us? So I used to become known for, in a prioritization meeting, we wanted to prioritize something, and I would say, well, what customer feedback do we have that says this should be what we should be prioritizing? And so it was always, hey, we took these actions because of this customer feedback, and it led to X, Y, and Z business impact.
Wonderful. And you can actually apply that to any role, right? Like you're mentioning executives, but if you're talking to a designer or a researcher or somebody in tech, also tailor this what you say to them. And so I think
Yeah.
always be conscious of who you're talking to, I guess, is the general learning.
Yeah, it's about understanding the context of the language they speak, right? So a marketer is going to speak a specific language,
Exactly.
operation, tech, we speak something completely different in tech than we do kind of in retail, right? And so I think one of the reasons why CX will be dead in 2 years, especially CX as we know it, and I actually think it'll be quicker than that, is we're still holding on to traditional experience management instead of talking the language of who the end persona is.
No, wonderful. Yeah. So I think that's a great learning. Know who you're talking to, and it's the beautiful thing of CX is that is impacted by everything, but it also makes it complex, and that's also why you have to be able to speak to anyone in the right
Yeah,
language. So I
I
think
mean, look, we're at the end of the day, as consumers, we are humans. And there's nothing simplistic about a freaking human, right?
no,
We are complex individuals and beings, and our preferences and our needs, they change so quickly, right? We are a culture fascinated with 6-second videos on Instagram and TikTok. And so our brand loyalty changes every 6 seconds, right? So customer
true
experience
that.
is never designed to be easy. You're dealing with human emotions, like it's complex stuff.
Yeah, and this is true for customers, but also for internal stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Hey, Zach, we're getting to the end of it, things. May I ask you, like, a next guest suggestion? Who should, understanding now that we're really trying to connect CX and the impact it and directly tying it to commercial and business results, like, who do you think would be a great next guest to invite to this podcast?
Yeah, there's two that I would suggest. One is a dear friend, former colleague and mentor, Bill Stakos. We love to have conversations or text messages. You'll see him and I engage a lot on LinkedIn together about the future of customer experience. And I think
Very much.
I can very much say that he believes traditional experience management is dead as a practice. He is a disruptor at heart. I love his prediction Fridays, where he's thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, AI, just what's the future of that. And quite frankly, I'm more of like a disrupt the basics of CX and fundamentals, and apply more of a business hat to it. Bill's more of what does the future of CX look like, and how do you pull AI and everything into it. So I think he would be a phenomenal guest. The other guest I would love for you to bring on, I can't help you with this one. I can help you with Bill. I'll text him after this. Is Elliot Hill. He's the new CEO of Nike. And I love Nike. I love how, you know, the last 5 years have been hell for them, right? I think they completely went away from their core values of focusing on the athlete, right? They were an athlete's brand. And so the last 5 years have been absolute hell and abysmal for them because they've gone away from their core element of we are a brand for athletes. But I think Elliot, he grew up at Nike, right?
Yeah.
Operations, he grew up at Nike. He's taking the new helm. And so I'd love to hear from him. The question I'd love him to answer is what is your plan to return Nike back to being a brand for the athletes?
And he went up the ranks. So like if
Yeah.
you know what operations is like, you know what segmentation is like, what product portfolio is like, and he's seen all of it probably.
Yeah, that's so those are the two guests. I'll nudge Bill for you.
And thanks for the
I wish
challenge.
I could say I can help you out with Elliot, but I couldn't help you out with Elliot. Him and I aren't on speed dial.
It's a good challenge. So thanks for the challenge of getting the CEO of Nike on board. But let's try.
That's right.
And then finally, Zach, thanks for sharing all this, and especially the tangible examples that you shared. I think that's actually what listeners are really excited about. Is there a closing key message? Like, what is there a motto or something that you want to give or the listeners as a great advice to achieve what you're trying to do within ParcelLab, but in general?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think just in general, the way that you and I, Harold, got connected was, about 2 months ago, I just launched Unfucking Your CX newsletter. And quite frankly, I had no goal for it, no plan for it. To be honest, I just got tired of scrolling through my LinkedIn feed and and seeing CX practitioners bitch and complain about the same stuff that they've been bitching and complaining about for the last 20 years, which is, I don't have a seat at the executive table, our leadership doesn't value CX. And so ultimately, I launched the newsletter just to start challenging the status quo and saying, hey, look, it isn't the business, it's you. It's the way that you're going about leading CX. It's the way that you've fallen trapped into NPS is the holy grail of customer experience, which it's not. And I love to debate about that on LinkedIn. And so I think my message would just be take a step back and look at your CX strategy and really think about what purpose is it serving?
Understood.
Is it serving customers or is it serving a metric? And I think most brands would step back and say, we're serving a freaking metric. And I think it's how do you unfuck that? Which means how do you get back to the core purpose of serving your customers while delivering business value? If you are not delivering business value, you will get laid off. I mean,
sooner or later. Yeah.
You will. And quite frankly, I would implore a brand, if your customer experience strategy is not delivering tangible business impact back to your P&L and your CX leader can't prove it to you, by all means, cut the program, cut the funding, cut them, and find someone who can deliver it for you.
So change that or go somewhere else.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Zack. Thanks so much. Very inspiring. And, I'll see you around on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's been a blast. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
So, that was another episode of the Promise Podcast, where we discuss effective ways for brands to deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review. Check haroldlammers.com for more great content. Hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, keep pushing to deliver on the promise.